I live in a very rural area on a small ranch that has been with my family since my grandfather. We are about 15 minutes from the nearest small town. When I say small, I really mean small. I met my wife by chance about 6 years ago when I stopped in town to pick up some groceries. She gave off a very tomboy vibe and she just came to the area herself. She had just finished school and found that she hated city life and wanted to come back to something more familiar. I'll get to that later. I guess she saw me pull in with my pickup and some of the heavier equipment in it, and she came over and asked what sort of livestock I had. She quickly cut to the chase. She was looking for work, she had experience with livestock, and she was new to the area. It is strange in our area to have single women looking for work as a ranch hand, but she said she could prove her worth, and, if I wasn't impressed, I was free to drive her back to town at the bus stop and that'd be that. I was looking for an extra hand for the upcoming months and was considering contacting my neighbor's boys for it, but figured I'd give her a shot. Glad I did too. She has one hell of a work ethic, and was proactive about everything on the ranch. I let her stay in a guest room in the main house for the first week, until she had enough pay for an apartment, but within 6 months she moved back in when we started dating. 8 months later was when we married in a small ceremony with about 20 friends and family members. The only person to show up from her family was her uncle. Uncle was a tank of man, even in his older years, and had a sheep farm in Northern California. Him and I talked shop a bit when he was there, and he was proud to give wife away. I could see where wife got her work ethic and knowledge of livestock from the man. There was, however, one topic that wife did not like to discuss. It was her birth parents. At first, all she would say was there was bad blood between them. Early on, that was fine. We didn't know each other yet. But after the engagement, I wanted to know more about her, and know what exactly I was diving into. Her mother, the professor, worked in a college teaching a class I most likely would never attend. Her father, Phil, was, as wife described, a weak man that does what the professor demands. Some of the things wife described the professor in doing sounded absurd and borderline insane. It included her trying to get wife a girlfriend in middle school, insisting wife was a lesbian. Now, wife is a bit of a tomboy, there's no denying that, but she is also most definitely not a lesbian. There was a period where the professor wanted to live a natural lifestyle, and she asked Phil's brother to let them live on his farm. Within a week, the professor hated the farm and dragged them both back to the city. Wife, on the other hand, felt like she finally found something she liked and really connected with her uncle. Wife left home when she was 16 and lived with uncle until she was 18. All while she was with uncle, the professor kept threatening to drag her back. She never did. After wife turned 18, she went to school and received a 4-year degree and tried to work an office job, but found it unfulfilling. She started to take the bus and working odd jobs in rural areas, looking for something that fit what she was looking for. That was when our paths crossed. Last year, around March, we started getting mail addressed to the professor and fill bills and bank statements and such. I found this strange, and wife wanted to trash it. I started marking them return to sender and no such occupant and dropped them right back into the mailbox. This came to a head in October when I was cleaning up the yard and a bright white SUV drove up with a U-Haul attached to it. Wife looked up and turned pale. "Oh God, it's them," she said. Out stepped a rotund woman and a thin man that only had a passingly resemblance to uncle. The professor immediately walked up to wife. "Professor, well, let me have it look at you. It's been years." Wife, "Mom. What are you doing here?" "Professor, the university is doing virtual classes, and with COVID, we figured we can self-isolate at our ranch." The R had a weird emphasis. Me, "Excuse me, but this isn't your ranch." Professor, "Oh, I'm sure we can have the ownership all cleared up." "Well, aren't you going to invite us in?" Me, "Ma'am, you may be my wife's mother, but you are a stranger to me. I would rather not." The professor turned to Phil. "Professor, make the call." Phil instantly got on the phone with the police and started spinning a tale about us not letting them into the house that they equally own with us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and how insane it was being spun. Luckily, as I said before, small town. The sheriff pulled up, and it was someone I knew for most of my life. Sheriff really embodies the mindset of a small town constable. He tries to be a peacemaker and a peacekeeper first and foremost. He also knew that this land was in my family's name for 3 generations. "Sheriff, what's this I hear about you selling half your ranch, Duke?" Me, "I didn't. These are my wife's parents and they think they have a legal stake on my land." Professor, "Not think, no. We've lived here since February. With tenant laws, that means." Sheriff, "Funny, I don't remember you in town." That shut the professor right up for a second, but then she reached in her bag and pulled out a stack of letters. A lot of them the bills and bank statements, with the ranch's address. Professor, "Then how do you explain these?" Sheriff took the letters and looked at them. Sheriff, "Ma'am, these are all marked return to sender." The professor turned desperate. "Professor, please. I haven't seen my daughter in years. I just want to make sure she's okay. Surely you can see that he," she pointed to me, "is controlling her every move." Sheriff rolled his eyes and walked over to talk to wife and I again. Sheriff likes to solve problems between people. And he hasn't encountered this level of crazy before. Sheriff, you might just want to invite them in for coffee. Talk for a few minutes. Wife, they are your parents. Wife, if you leave them here, you will just have to come back in 5 minutes to handle an assault. Sheriff, wife, you can't mean that. They're your family. Look, I'm just going to head up the road. Invite them in, talk to them. Wife got a bit of an angry glint in her eye. Wife, does this mean you're going to invite your cousin Aaron to Thanksgiving? Sheriff's cousin Aaron was currently serving 8 years for a multitude of felonies. Sheriff's entire family consider him the family shame. With that statement, the look in Sheriff's eyes changed. He gave wife a look like that bad, huh? And wife merely nodded. Sheriff turned back to the professor and Phil. Sheriff, all right, they don't want you here. Best you two not come back. The two protested briefly, but then piled back into the SUV and drove off, with Sheriff trailing right behind to make sure they were completely off the property. This was the first time I met the professor and Phil, but it definitely stuck with me. I detailed earlier about how my wife's mother, the professor, tried a strange attempt to seize control of our ranch back in October. In December, it got crazier. Keep in mind we live in a smaller town. About an hour away from a major city, so it's not like we are totally in the boondocks. Our ranch is about 15 minutes from town by farm road, just to give you a lay of the land. I stopped into town to get some supplies, and by the time I was done packing up the truck, the professor tapped me on the shoulder. This time she actually acted cordial. I chose to be curt. She basically begged me to at least listen to her for 5 minutes in the local cafe. I didn't want her to create a scene on Main Street, so I agreed. We sat and the professor talked. She claimed my wife was always confused about who she was, and that the professor and Phil had only her best interests in mind. I didn't want to yell, shout, accuse, or throw anything back in her face. I was just waiting out the clock. She said my wife saw you coming and wedged herself into my life. At that I did push back at. I said that I felt I was blessed to have her in my life. Hoo boy, those were the wrong words to use with this woman. Professor, what do you mean blessed? Dukes, pardon? Professor, you just said blessed. I put my head in my hands and just wished this was over, everyone in the cafe looking at the two of us. The professor really projected her voice with the last sentence. Dukes, ma'am, if you're trying to win me over, I suggest you stop using vinegar. She sort of humped at that statement. But she did become cordial again. She dug into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. She placed it on the table in between us. Professor, fine. This is all the proof you need. Take a look, and I promise you will know the truth. I was dying on the inside from embarrassment from how my mother-in-law acted, with people I do business with regularly all watching. They will want to know what happened, and why. Like I said before, small town. I took the flash drive and left. I got back to the ranch where my wife was waiting, and she could instantly tell something happened in town from the pissed off look on my face. I explained what happened in town and held up the flash drive. Wife looked confused by it. I certainly wasn't willing to plug this thing into a computer we regularly use, so I dug through a closet for an old Dell laptop that wasn't powered on in forever. We let it charge, turned it on and flipped off the Wi-Fi. The last one was my wife's idea. We plugged the flash drive in and there were stacks and stacks of PDFs. I am still not sure how to describe what was in them. It was a, I guess, journal? A college paper? Thesis? Study? With my wife as the subject. I'm not even sure what the point of it was, or what the professor was testing on her own flesh and blood. It detailed her first playing with toy dump trucks when she was a child to dressing in overalls during the brief time they lived with her uncle together. All if it cold, detached, and, as my wife put it, clinical. Wife was referred to as subject throughout. It was bizarre. And I'm still not sure what the point of it was. My wife looked disgusted at the PDFs and insisted we burn the drive. Which we did in the fire pit. That was the last time we heard from the professor. My wife thinks more is coming. First I want to say wife is doing fine. She's more amused than scared or angry, but I can tell when she feels a need to be guarded. We did install a new camera pointed directly down at the gate and I'm keeping it locked. I said in the comments we had a FaceTime call with my wife's uncle to see if we could get more insight last night. At first, her uncle gave very short answers. Stuff like yeah, sounds like her and sounds about right. He's very much a don't speak ill of others type of man. When I told him about the weird play for the ranch, he finally was willing to give a bit more information. Whoever predicted she attempted this in the past with his sheep farm? Gold star. He said the professor was a big reason why him and Phil don't talk anymore. Wife's uncle's sheep farm was part of a much larger piece of land owned by my wife's grandfather. The grandfather had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter went off to the East Coast and works a high-paying executive job of some type. She's also near retiring, and was the oldest of the siblings. The grandfather split his property into 3 slices when he died. His daughter sold her part to uncle for almost nothing. She didn't want rural property nor has she made a claim for it, and knew uncle wanted to keep the farm going. The other son, or Phil, sort of kept ownership but gave permission for uncle to keep using it. That was until he wanted to go to an expensive university. He sold his part of the land to uncle for a good chunk of change. Uncle got to keep all of grandfather's land in one piece. In college, Phil dated the professor, and then married. Uncle heard bits and pieces, but Phil just only called during Thanksgiving and his birthday, and that was about it for many years. A few years later, Professor was in, as the uncle called it, a hipster phase and heard about the farm. She didn't just show up. Phil asked first. Phil knew what rural life was like, Professor didn't. Uncle described it as the professor had a vision of waking up to a kale smoothie, digging up beets for lunch and enjoying the sun the rest of the day. If you live on a farm or a ranch, you're spoiled for choice when it comes to daily chores. Uncle's farm was primarily a sheep farm, but they had a vegetable garden and a small orchard. This meant work. Uncle was easy on the professor. She was only given a few chores, such as clipping dead vines in the garden and airing the compost. She apparently treated this like an ordeal. She nearly destroyed the tomatoes Uncle was growing that year, and he had to redo the compost every evening. But the way she complained, you'd think she was tending the orchard and the sheep. She did not like manual labor. But, she was also oddly in love with the idea of a farm. You can't have the joy without the pain, in my experience. Wife, on the other hand, took to it like a duck to water. She loved to check the fences, check the flock, dole out the feed, and tend to the small vegetable garden. Uncle said that they had a local butcher that came once in a while for a few lambs, depending on price and demand. Butcher visited once during the professor's time on the farm. Butcher was a black man, which Uncle didn't mind or care. Professor cared. She made a big show of greeting him, shaking his hand, and talking to him in a very sing-songy, high-pitched way. Uncle found this very strange. At least strange enough to mention to us. Professor wanted the farm, but didn't want to work it. She wanted to own it on paper and have the uncle and her husband work it. She went as far as to push her husband to contest the sale he had with Uncle a few years back to gain a partial ownership. This went nowhere, of course. Uncle did have to hire a lawyer, but it didn't even make it to court. Him and the rest of the family refused to talk to Phil after that. I was curious, so I had to know why the professor blew up at me when I said I was blessed to have wife. He chuckled a bit. Really kicked that hornet's nest, huh? He said. First night the professor was staying with Uncle and his wife prepared dinner. They got to the table and Uncle was about to say grace. My wife blushed when he brought this up. Apparently this is a very embarrassing memory for her. Professor blew up. She said something about how this family doesn't say grace. Uncle shrugged. He wanted to be accommodating and responded that she didn't have to join if she didn't want to. She tried to push it further. As long as she was in that house, there would be no saying grace. Uncle said this was the first time he was rude to the professor. He told her that there was no way a guest was telling him what he could and couldn't do in his own home. Apparently the professor didn't think people in rural areas go to church or something? I don't know. After hearing about the sheep farm, I will get in touch with a lawyer. We'll see how that goes. I think I've said it before in an earlier post, but we live in a small town. My crazy mill, the professor, has made waves in just 2 appearances, one at our residence, and another in town. What I love about small towns is that everyone feels like family and has everyone's backs. What I hate about small towns is that rumors start quickly. The sheriff from my first post is totally on our side and has done his best to make it clear to people who ask that it's not their business. The problem is wife and I, we try to enjoy being social in town. Before COVID, we went to church often and participated in potlucks. I hired my neighbor's boys for the summer several times to help around the ranch. We love being social. When the professor made a scene at the cafe in December, I could feel the eyes of the town on me. No one knows what happened, but they want to. I can feel it. They are too polite to ask, but not polite enough to not whisper. It's getting to us. The sheriff told me that last week the local pastor outright asked him what was going on with wife and her mother. Sheriff said the pastor felt there should be an easy solution. Sheriff nipped that into bud. My wife's words had a stronger effect than we thought. Sheriff said it wasn't his business or the pastor's unless we asked for help. He did say to the pastor, and I'm remembering how the sheriff phrased it to me when he told me, they're part of your flock. She, the professor, is the wolf. Be a good shepherd. Even with that, I still feel the weird glances every time I'm in town. Scenes like the one in December isn't usual around here. Any advice? Well, it finally happened. The professor and Phil are in jail. The circumstances are a bit strange as well, but we are glad there's a conclusion at least. 2 nights ago, the sheriff called us in the middle of the day. My wife picked up and after a few minutes of chatting she started laughing. She told me what the sheriff told her. It seems the professor and Phil decided they wanted to try to sneak onto our land. Why? Geez, I can't predict this woman. The professor decided that instead of trying to get onto the ranch from the farm road, which we have clear view of from the house, that her and Phil decided to park a little ways away, and try to get onto our land via a neighbor's property. My neighbor to the east has a small orchard and is a hobby beekeeper. He doesn't get a lot of honey a year and what he does he shares or sells at the farmer's market. Field chickweed just started to flow here, so the bees were out. The professor apparently stumbled onto his bee boxes, and I mean literally bumped into one. The bees started swarming her and either her or Phil got mad and kicked one of the boxes over. My neighbor keeps a sensor perimeter around his bee boxes in case of bears, so that went off and he ran to his bee boxes to see 2 middle-aged people running around, swatting at bees and yelling. Neighbor called the sheriff, and after about 20 minutes of the neighbor trying to smoke the bees and hosing them off, promptly pressed charges for the destruction of his bee box and trespassing. Apparently there are additional charges for disrupting/destroying a farm's agricultural capability, and since his bees are pollinators for his orchard, away the two went. Both were apparently covered in stings and are in county lockup now. Sheriff said the professor is trying to say the area the bee boxes are in were a public easement and she had rightful access to the area. But for now, it's over. Everyone here is having a huge sigh of relief. Now on to next story. Best friend claims she hooked up with my boyfriend, but he insists it never happened, and now I'm caught between believing either of them. I've been best friends with Becca since 2010, we were college roommates and then after we graduated we still lived together up until I moved in with my boyfriend Nate in 2019. One thing about Becca is that she's always had a drinking problem for as long as I've known her, and she's done stuff while drunk that has sometimes caused problems in our friendship. She does try to stay sober, but every few years something will happen to make her start drinking again, which is what happened earlier this summer. So last Saturday Becca called me because she was drunk somewhere and needed a ride home. I couldn't go pick her up because I had the FLU and I was on cold medicine, so Nate went to get her instead. A couple of days after that I started noticing that Nate was being weird with his phone. Normally he leaves it out on the coffee table if we're watching TV or whatever, but he started putting it face down so I couldn't see what notifications he was getting. My first thought was that he was trying to plan a surprise, and because of the timing I thought that maybe Becca was helping him. Yesterday I saw Becca. I told her that Nate was being sneaky all of a sudden and asked her if he said anything about maybe proposing soon. She asked me if I looked through his phone and I said no. Becca started crying and told me that she and Nate hooked up in his car the night that he came to pick her up. Her excuse was that she was really drunk and didn't fully know what she was doing. She said she'd been texting him since, telling him that he needed to tell me what happened or else she was going to. I asked Becca to show me the texts, but they were all in the app Signal, which deletes messages after a day, so all I could see was that she and Nate had a chat thread but nothing that they said. I told her to text Nate in front of me so I could see what he said and she did, but we got no read receipt and so no response at all, so it didn't prove anything. I asked Becca if she was sure she wasn't so drunk that she maybe imagined it or thought a dream was real, and she absolutely lost her shit on me and said that she knows that she's horrible when she drinks but that she's not fucking delusional and she doesn't make shit up. She said that I could believe her or not and it's my choice, but she was telling me the truth. I said I needed to go home and talk to Nate. So when I got home I confronted Nate with what Becca had said, and he acted shocked and denied that anything like that had happened at all and said he didn't know why she'd think so or say so. He said that he had just given Becca a ride home and the only thing that happened was that they talked about how he and I had been together for a long time and how we should get married already. He admitted they were talking on Signal the next couple of days, but he said that it was about exactly what I thought, that he was asking her about engagement rings and what kind of proposal I would want. Nate replied to Becca's message from before asking her if she made up a story about them hooking up to not ruin the surprise about his proposal, and she texted him back that there was no proposal and to stop playing dumb. So then Nate called her pretending like I wasn't in the room and told her that she needed to stop whatever she was trying to do because we were on the verge of breaking up and he'd rather just have the surprise be ruined, but Becca just kept telling Nate to stop lying until he got angry and hung up on her. I really didn't know what to think and I still don't. Right now Nate is really upset and not really talking to me much. He says that it's bad enough that Becca acted insane and ruined his plan to propose, but it's even worse that I believed her lies even a little and would think that he would ever cheat on me. Becca texted me saying she was sorry, but otherwise I haven't talked to her either. I don't want to think that Nate would cheat on me or that he'd take advantage of Becca if she was that drunk, but I feel like I can't be 100% sure because I've known Becca for 13 years and I also just can't believe that she'd lie to me about something this important. And I know that she does have a drinking problem, so I can believe that she'd sleep with my boyfriend if she was drunk out of her head. She's done some pretty awful things in the past when she's been drunk. I don't want to wrongly accuse Nate of something he didn't do, but I don't want to be an idiot. I don't know what my gut says. It both says that Nate wouldn't do this and that Becca wouldn't lie about it, but obviously both of those things can't be true. So in the past when she's been drunk, Becca's blacked out and started fights with me or other people. She'll say really out of line insulting things. She's kicked people out of our apartment because she didn't remember inviting them in. She's accused me of stealing clothes from her because I was wearing an outfit that looked like something that she also owned, that kind of thing. She's never hooked up with anyone that I was dating, but she's definitely hooked up with guys that she knew I was interested in. I don't know. I really don't think that Nate would cheat, but I just can't imagine that Becca would completely make this up. Both of their stories somewhat make sense to me, but I don't know. I don't know why Becca would be saying this if it wasn't true, but I'm afraid of deciding I definitely believe her and then having her later realize she forgot she hooked up with somebody else that night or something. If he's telling the truth, it's because it's only after that night that he started planning a proposal. From what he said, he didn't start planning the proposal that night. It was that Becca mentioned that we should get married already because it's been 7 years and he thought about it, and then the next day he sent her a message to ask her what kind of ring I would want. I've never noticed anything weird from Nate towards Becca. If anything, he doesn't like her very much. I don't know if envious is the right word, but in the past Becca didn't like me and Nate being together because she felt like I was abandoning her for him. I'm not sure how long he was gone. I fell asleep when he was gone and he didn't wake me up when he got back. But I know he didn't shower when he got home because that definitely would have woken me up. Update 1. So on Thursday night after I got everyone's advice, I told Nate that I had found out a way to recover deleted messages from Signal. He immediately took out his phone and opened the app and asked me to show him how to do it, so, I already thought that must mean he was telling me the truth because he didn't panic or hesitate at all. Which was good because when I tried to download Signal on my old phone it turned out that it's too old to support the current version of the app, so it wouldn't work. Nate then asked me if we were going to have to go out and buy a new phone for me to believe that he was telling me the truth, and he said that he was willing to do it if that's what it would take. I told Nate it wasn't that I didn't believe him, I just wanted to have some proof because I just couldn't understand why Becca would lie about it. Nate said that she would lie about it because she's a fucking crazy drunk bitch and there's literally no way for a non-crazy person to understand why she would do anything, and once the messages proved that he didn't ever want me talking to her again. Then he said to get up because if we were going to go to the Verizon store we had to get there before it closed. By then I completely believed Nate anyway, so I told him we didn't have to go anywhere or get a new phone and that I believed him and I knew he didn't cheat on me and that he would never do that. Nate said that he would hope I know that and that he didn't understand why I didn't take his word for it in the first place. I started trying to explain why I didn't want to just immediately dismiss what Becca had said happened, but Nate said that he really couldn't listen to that right now. I said that was fair and agreed that I would cut Becca off, but that first I wanted to try to get her to admit that nothing happened. Nate said fine, but to call her with my phone on speaker because he thought he also deserved to hear her admit that she was lying. So I called Becca and I said the same thing to her that I said to Nate, that I figured out how to recover deleted messages on Signal. She asked me why I would need to do that, so that was when I knew for sure that she was definitely making it up and not just confu, said somehow. I said it was because I wanted to have proof of what she and Nate talked about. Becca asked me if I saw their messages, so I lied and said yes. After that Becca just went silent until finally I asked her if she was going to say anything. Then she asked me if that meant that we were engaged now. So then I really just lost it on her and screamed at her asking her if she was fucking serious and what the fuck was wrong with her and how could that possibly be all that she had to say. Becca started screaming back telling me to fucking calm down and about how obviously I never believed her anyway because it's not like we broke up over it. I was crying by that point and because of that I couldn't really say anything else, so then Nate told Becca to go fuck herself and to never ever contact either one of us ever again and hung up on her. A minute later Becca sent me a completely unhinged text that I'm quoting here verbatim, apart from changed names. Courtney. You are supposed to be my friend for life. You are supposed to be there for me. You are supposed to be my person. But then you meet Nate and now you only care about Nate. Everything is about Nate. Tell me why Nate comes to pick me up when I call you? I called you not your precious fucking Nate. I only want you to see how fucked up this is, but do you? No. Of course you don't. Of course you choose Nate over me like you always do and like you always will. You pretend to care about me but I can see you don't care. It is pathetic, Courtney. You are a pathetic woman who would choose a man over a friend. But since you can't say it yourself I will. Since you have to have your sweet perfect little baby Nate do it for you I will. Goodbye, Courtney. Is that what you want? Goodbye forever. I hope you fucking got what you fucking want. There were the 3 dots after that showing she was still typing more, but I blocked her before she sent it. I don't care about anything else that she has to say, I'm sure it's all just going to be more bullshit about why this is my fault or justifications about why what she did wasn't that bad and I should forgive her. I know Nate is probably right and there's no non-crazy logic behind why Becca would stoop to doing something like this, but obviously I've still been thinking about it and my best guess is that whoever said that Becca still blames me and Nate, apparently mostly Nate, for her being a drunk mess who can't get her life together is right. It seems like she somehow thought that if she said she hooked up with Nate, I'd break up with him but still want to be friends with her and then everything would magically be fixed. As far as stuff with Nate, I asked him if he thought he could ever forgive me for doubting him and he said that since I came to my senses and I cut Becca off he guesses we can try to put it behind us. I don't think he's still going to propose anytime soon. After this I probably wouldn't if I was him. And from what Nate said he didn't actually do any planning yet other than asking Becca about rings and if I'd think a public proposal was tacky or not. All he was doing so far was trying to get ideas without me knowing he was talking to her about it. So just based on that I think probably it's not going to happen for a while if it still does at all. Also, thanks to everyone for the advice and support. I know I didn't respond to many comments but I really did appreciate everyone who cared enough to want to help. Oop, I'm sure she won't just go away. I'm already expecting her to try to get our other friends to get in the middle of everything as soon as she figures out she's actually blocked and I'm not just ignoring her. I hope she won't try to do anything else but I guess at this point I really can't know with her. Update 2. It turned out that whatever was going on with Becca that caused her to make false accusations about Nate was the beginning of some kind of a psychotic break. After I blocked her she made a whole bunch of fake accounts and started sending me completely unhinged shit about how I ruined her life and threatening to get revenge on me and Nate. This went on for literally months with her sending me dozens of messages a day. I found out from other friends that she was making multiple posts on Facebook every day that were semi-coherent rants about how much she hated me and how I was evil and ruined her life intentionally. I tried to talk to the police 2 different times to get a restraining order because I was afraid that Becca was going to show up at our apartment and attack me or Nate. I literally even got a front door camera because I was so scared that she was going to hurt us. The police said that because Becca wasn't threatening actual violence, she was just a nuisance and they couldn't do anything. They acted like I was an idiot because it isn't illegal to talk shit on Facebook, and they basically told me to just keep blocking her whenever she made a new account and eventually she'd get bored and move on. Then finally there was an incident where someone broke the windshield of Nate's car while he was parked at his work. I guess it could have just been a random act of vandalism because his wasn't the only car that got windows broken, but at the time I was 100% sure it was Becca, so I went to the police again. Eventually an officer went to talk to Becca, and she said she didn't touch Nate's car, and again I have no proof that she did. But after the police talked to her, Becca got put into a psych ward for a week because apparently her apartment was filthy and she was drunk out of her mind 24/7 and a danger to herself. I have not heard anything from Becca after she left the psych ward. I don't know if she was diagnosed with something or if she's medicated now or what. I found out that she moved in with her dad, who thank God lives in a different state. I look at her social media every so often to make sure she's not posting about me again and that she's nowhere around me.
I haven't mentioned Nate much in this update because we're no longer together.
He broke up with me after the windshield incident because he couldn't handle being constantly harassed by Becca, and to be honest I don't think he ever forgave me for not taking his side immediately when everything started. It really hurt, but I can't blame him. I tried to talk to him about fixing things between us after Becca was gone, but he just wasn't interested. So in the past when she's been drunk, Becca's blacked out and started fights with me or other people. She'll say really out of line insulting things. She's kicked people out of our apartment because she didn't remember inviting them in. She's accused me of stealing clothes from her because I was wearing an outfit that looked like something that she also owned, that kind of thing. She's never hooked up with anyone that I was dating, but she's definitely hooked up with guys that she knew I was interested in.